There's a lot of speculation amongst professionals in the financial services industry around the whole OECD BEPS initiative, and particularly so with investment management. And to date, the OECD have produced over 1,000 pages worth of documentation, and they're not even halfway there yet. So, for those of us who haven't read those 1,000 plus pages, what does BEPS mean for professionals in the investment management industry?
Well, I suppose largely it's important to get the context of what BEPS actually is. I would assume most people are aware of all of the high-profile cases associated with the household brands, where there has been public outcry at perceived tax avoidance structures. So in response to that, the G20 finance ministers actually asked the OECD to come up with proposed changes to international tax laws. And this is what largely created then the BEPS project. Now, the BEPS project itself is actually 15 actions that the OECD are considering in turn. And the deliverables from each of these actions then are expected to be implemented into local legislation in each of the jurisdictions once they're finalised. The actions themselves should be finished by the end of this year, so obviously it's up to governments after that to implement.
So if the primary focus was on those household brands, which are typically in digital, retail, technology sector, why should we in the investment management industry care?
It's a very good question. Largely what's happened is the rules will change international tax rules generally, so they will capture all sectors. I think the household brands have created the attention, but actually the consequences of that are going to be far-reaching. Specifically in terms of the investment management industry, I largely think there's probably three of the actions now that everyone should really be aware of. The first is greater focus on transfer pricing and substance. So one of the proposals that's coming out under BEPS is that profits should be allocated within a multinational group very much where the substance is located. And substance, by substance we mean where individuals are located. So for many transfer pricing policies which are very much focused on the use of comparables to price individual transaction flows, that reliance on comparables is largely going to be lessened, and this focus on substance is potentially going to overrule it. The second point really then is around permanent establishments. So a permanent establishment is a local tax presence in a certain jurisdiction, and one of the proposals around permanent establishments is actually to lower the threshold that can actually then create a permanent establishment. The consequence of that could mean that we start recognising a whole host more permanent establishment in jurisdictions where historically we haven't had to do so. And then the final one that I think is very relevant for the investment management industry as well is around interest deductibility. So many fund structures have actually relied on the availability of interest to actually repatriate the income up through their structures. And one of the proposals is actually to restrict the availability of deductions for that interest based on a couple of tests. And the tests are very formulaic. One of the consequences is that a formulaic test is much more likely to be more restrictive on your interest deductions. So that clearly is going to have an impact for funds and their gains.
Okay. So, as I understand it at the moment, we know the direction of travel. We still don't know any certainty what the actual final recommendations are going to be. So at this point in time, what should service providers here in the Channel Islands be doing to prepare for BEPS?
It's probably the most common question I get asked at the moment. I think for me it's all about identifying the actions that you can think about now, and those actions that possibly you should have an awareness but there's not a great deal you can do about it. To put some examples around that, you may be aware that from 1st of January 2016 most governments around the world are expected to implement what's called country-by-country reporting. And that basically means that taxpayers, multinational groups, are going to have to disclose to tax authorities how their global profit is allocated in each country. Now, clearly that's a level of disclosure that the tax authorities have never had before. So before you're forced to do that, it kind of makes sense to start thinking about what that disclosure would look like. And is there anything in there that you feel you wouldn't feel comfortable with? I would hope that most of the structures would be absolutely fine, but if there is something in there that initially looks confusing, then explore it further and understand in greater detail why that's the case. In contrast, you have, say, I mentioned previously the interest deductibility point. these rules are likely to come through. I know there's a lot of lobbying going on in the background in order to make sure that some unforeseen circumstances don't happen. But in terms of the rules themselves, there's not really a great deal you can do about them. But to the extent that they are likely to have quite a fundamental impact on how a fund recognises its gains and profits, it's most definitely worth having that conversation internally to make sure everyone's fully aware of the potential consequences.
So it's pretty clear then that funds and fund managers based here in Jersey and Guernsey are going to face significant challenges over the next few years.
Yeah.
But I suppose also it's clear that those that are most able to best adapt their business models, actually there's quite a lot of opportunities over the next few years as well.
Mm.